welcome to In Conversation. The Government of India is set to present the Union Budget for the 2024-25 financial year on 23rd July. It will be the first budget of Modi 3.0 or the third term of the Modi government. As always, the budget is expected to lay out the government's economic vision and priorities for the next 1 year, if not more. If we look at India's macroeconomic picture, then we see that the Indian economy grew at a world-beating 8.2% in the last fiscal. The RBI has upgraded its growth forecast for the fiscal year 2024-25 to 7.2%, up from 7%. And this is driven by a resurgence in private consumption, robust investment and a rebound in exports as well. So the Indian economy is expanding at the fastest rate among major emerging economies and tax receipts are higher. These are factors that could prompt Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman to increase spending in the budget. The interim budget presented in February targeted a fiscal deficit of 5.1% of GDP for the current financial year. So, would there be reforms to stimulate economic growth while walking the path of fiscal discipline? And will the budget see an increase in spending on infrastructure and welfare programs, especially after the bumper dividend payouts from the central bank and increased tax revenue? Well, we need to wait for the Union Budget presentation to know that. But before that, let's understand the expectations of the Indian industry from the budget. Joining us now is Chandrajit Banerjee, the Director General of the Confederation of Indian Industry, a chamber of Indian industry, to discuss Indian industry's expectations from the Union Budget. Welcome, Mr. Banerjee, to DD India. How are you doing?
Very good. Thank you very much, Munmun, for having me once again on your show. Thank you.
Always a pleasure. The one question that always comes to mind ahead of the budget is whether it would be a pro-growth budget or not. What is CII's growth expectation for 2024-25 from the budget, and what do you anticipate as the growth drivers in this budget?
So I think, the budget should continue with the focus on growth. This will be the present Honorable Finance Minister's 7th budget, and therefore one expects that growth momentum in the budget to be continued. Today, if we really look at the Indian economy, we have fairly robust investment demand, also robust manufacturing activity, which is pretty much there, coupled with, if one looks at the business sentiments and the consumer sentiments, they are pretty good at this point in time. And I see a few, quite a few high frequency indicators like the GST or the current revenue collections. Even if you look at the automobile sales, and if one looks at things like the air passenger traffic that we have, or even the banking credit growth, so for instance, all of them look good to us, and with an expected boost to the rural economy in the budget and a revival of the farm sector, we expect that we can see a growth traction, a growth-oriented traction in the budget. So what one would expect, what CII expects, our economic growth to be is 8%, in 24-25, and our forecast, as you were saying, is a little bit higher than the median estimates by most of the other agencies. And our optimism really comes from what I just spoke about, and there is obviously a strong expectation of next-gen reforms, which is like the factor market ones, and even improving potential skills, the human capital, the ease of doing business to continue, cost of doing business reduction, that effort to continue. So one is putting it under all of this. So one, we have spoken about earlier about the normal monsoon this year. So that's one driving factor. Second, of course, the government's continued focus on the capex that one would expect in the budget. High levels of capacity utilization we see already in the infra-linked sectors, renewable sector, private sector has started coming in. Third, the continued softening, as we see, of the inflationary pressures, which is very, very good. And also, globally, if you see, there is a the global trade prospects, as mentioned by the WTO, that also looks to be positive. And fifth, and my last point would be the robust financial sector. Their credit growth in double digits today, and a very strong capital market. So all of this makes us believe that we can expect a higher growth in India, and the budget could be a great booster for that.
Fair enough. We have seen how public capital expenditure has been a key driver of India's growth in the post-reform period. Does the industry then expect the government to continue to prioritize capital expenditure or pivot towards greater fiscal discipline or do a balancing act?
See, my point is, while continuing, and we must continue to prioritize capital expenditure, because that is something which has really put India into a strong growth trajectory. And the capex which the government really provided has been a very, very important and a key driver. And so it remained very strongly committed. I mean, the government remained strongly very committed towards fiscal discipline. That's pretty evident when we see the narrowing of the fiscal deficit from 6.4% that we saw in 22-23 to 5.6% in 23-24. So I would think that while the capex should remain a priority, government I'm sure would uphold the fiscal discipline by adhering to the targeted fiscal deficit of 5.1% of the GDP for FY25. That was outlined in the interim budget, and that would really help mitigate all our risks and really ensure a strong macroeconomic stability.
Mr. Banerjee, expectation of an uptick in private capex has been there for some time now. When do you see a broad-based private sector capex recovery, and what could the budget do to support private investment?
So I think one of the things that is that I would really put behind us is whether the private sector would invest or not, because would start investing. I see that's already happening in many sectors, across the sectors. So we see the gross fixed capital formation of the private corporate sector that has risen considerably, and also the net fixed assets of the private companies that has also increased substantially. So given these, we also see in our the CII's business confidence survey, which we conducted last, we see a strong increase in capacity utilization of most of the sectors, and some of them pretty much above 80%, 75 to 100%. That cuts across most of the sectors. The second part is the private sector savings, and as we have seen in the CSO data, private sector that has also increased as a percentage of GDP. That could definitely lead to further private sector investment. I spoke about the capacity utilization, and we'd also seen the corporate profitability. And that's, again, a very important point. And net profits of private firms that has also considerably gone up, and we have seen a very strong annual growth there. And that also indicates that there will be financial resources for additional investment. So one sees that. And I must say that, the entire piece that we have seen on PLI, which has triggered off in 14 strategic sectors, a huge amount of investments coming in, fresh investments coming in those sectors is worth noting. There is a continued focus, and there has to be a continued focus on ease of doing business. And another very important point, which has been initiated but much needs to be focused on and carried on, is this entire piece on decriminalization efforts. So to really spur this private investments on, there has to be a thrust on some of these areas that I just mentioned, and that would really enable the private sector to come in a much stronger way.
If we come to rural demand now, then we see that it's been lagging urban demand for quite some time now. So what is your assessment of the current situation, and what can the government really do to lift rural demand in the budget?
So it is a very important area. I know there are the few indicators which I would really like to look at. One, of course, the rural FMCG volume growth that has been lagging pretty much, and the urban demand, and that has picked up in the last 5 quarters, and that overtook the urban demand in the Q4 of FY24. And that's a very important point, one that one sees. And also, if you really look at the auto, the two-wheeler segment, that's a very strong proxy for rural demand, and that also grew considerably in 23-24, double digit plus. So signs are there that rural demand is picking up, improving, and if, as we expect the monsoons to be good, that will see further strengthening of the rural demand. What we have been really recommending in the budget, and strongly pushing for, is that the capex that you talked about, where we could have greater focus on rural capital expenditure by the government is focused on the budget, and that's especially in the areas like irrigation, cold storage, warehousing, some dedicated transport corridors for boosting, value addition in agriculture. That all would be very, very critical to see a greater focus on rural. And the last point on that is, we need to see how we are really look at non-agricultural rural enterprises. So rural enterprises which could be encouraged. That itself would be a very important point to look at in the budget, and that could really help in a strong push for the rural from the rural demand side.
So you expect a boost to rural demand in the budget. There is also renewed focus on employment generation. What would the industry like the government to do to help generate good quality jobs and livelihoods across the country and at scale?
See, I'm glad that you mentioned the quality of jobs. I mean, it's A, jobs, B, quality of jobs. So I think it's very important. But if we really look at the recent RBI that cleanse data, so to say, it sort of gives certain very encouraging numbers in terms of job creation. But today, if we going forward, one of the important areas would be to see how we are able to I spoke about the success of the PLI schemes, which really triggered off a large number of sectors to come in. So if we really look at something, an equivalent of the PLI, say an ELI, an employment linked initiative scheme for some of our sectors which are very labor intensive, say for instance, toys, the demand would always be there. So if we really look at those sectors like that, of course, say, for instance, other sectors like textiles and apparels, that could be a very important area. Third, where there could be a huge amount of labor requirement and need, areas like the furniture or the wood-based industries. Areas even in the services sector, if you really look at areas like tourism, that can be a huge job generator. So I would really look at the budget giving some sort of employment linked incentives to some of these sectors, which can really give a strong boost. And within the labor force, I think there has to be, and there I would expect in the budget, some focus on the female labor force participation, higher incentives for women being engaged in companies. Now, one of the things, as we look at the piece of employment, employment would really come from the small and the mid-sized companies as we go along. So small and the mid-sized manufacturing companies would especially. That's going to be a huge generator of employment. And in that, I would think that things like the national single window system, those that will play a very, very, very critical role as to how we keep improving on it, and the states have a very important role to play on that. Certain states have done very well in terms of having a dedicated section to the for the MSMEs in the national single window schemes. So we would I think that those are going to be very critical areas, and I'm sure that the budget would give importance to the ease of doing business, so to say, for the MSME in particular act with respect to a large number of things, be it electricity, fire, factory safety, boiler safety, many of that strew of things. The last point on that I just really wanted to also focus on was the emphasis that we need to keep on the future of jobs vis-a-vis skills for those skill sets that are required. And I think that's going to play a critical role. And I would see even the budget providing a huge amount of focus on the development of capacity and human capacity, skill development, which then enables jobs in the country.
So you expect focus to be on employment-linked incentive as well as skilling. If we come to manufacturing now, then we know that it is something that has received a lot of emphasis from the government. However, the share of manufacturing in GDP has been stagnant. So what does the industry think is holding manufacturing back, and what policies would you suggest on that count?
So this narrative that keeps on coming about the stagnation of manufacturing, I personally would feel that there is some amount of a slight misplacement on that. We need to correct probably the thinking. And while it is true that the share of the manufacturing as a part of the GDP has been sort of constant, but that still means manufacturing is growing, and it's growing as fast as the GDP. And given how rapidly our GDP is growing, manufacturing keeping pace with that fast growth rate is according to me, pretty impressive. And then, of course, we spoke about PLI, which has been very, very, very successful and important. Lots of actually revenue accrued to the government because of PLI, and that was a great booster for even for manufacturing. Now, another thing which has happened, which is very, very significant in the country over the last few years, has been the way we have gone about the corporate tax. And then that is today made India very competitive in terms of manufacturing. But there are continued efforts which needs to be taken. It's been started. I mentioned about ease and cost of doing business, and I also focused on the entire piece that's important on as we go along to see how we can really focus much more on decriminalization, where we have seen a beginning. Now, while all of that continues, one looks at areas which are tough to do, and that's where one would really focus on. Say, for instance, the reforms in labor, the 4 labor codes. How do we get things? The entire labor codes, the 4 labor codes that were announced, some of that getting implemented in the states. So that's going to be important to watch for. The second piece we touched upon was the national single window system. But then, how do we make that? How do we get that much more improved, so to say? Time-bound approvals and making the time-bound approvals really work. And then, really, if you really look at certain things, which some of them may not even come under the budget, like electricity duty, petroleum duty under the GST, which you have been talking for a long time, that will really help the entire issue of, say, power costs, etc. Now, some of the other critical issues that are very clearly important as we go on in manufacturing, today manufacturing would also involve a lot of technology. So advanced manufacturing focusing on R&D is going to be very, very critical. And that's something which is, of course, the private sector has a lot of role to play. But we would really need to see how we are able to encourage the development of some of the innovative startups and see global collaborations on advanced manufacturing technologies. AI, say, for instance, is going to be very critical. Advanced materials, that's going to be key for for manufacturing, I would say. So some of these are going to be very critical areas that we would see how much of it can be done through the budget. Some of it, as I mentioned, are non-budget issues, but it's a whole gamut of stuff as we move ahead to encourage more manufacturing. And manufacturing, as we go ahead, would require again a lot of skills in these areas that I talked about, be it additive manufacturing, 3D printing, or robotics, automation. All of that would be very, very critical to have a strong manpower base too.
So that's about expectations from the manufacturing front. But another question that comes to mind is whether this would be a green budget, because the urgency of climate action cannot be overstated. Any suggestion then that the industry has for the budget for tackling the climate emergency?
Yes, of course. I mean, that's a very, very important piece. And, one of the most important areas, the entire world, and India is no exception, is going to be climate. And within climate, if I really look at is what's going to be critical for us to take quick action on is adaptation. I would imagine, something like a national commission on adaptation, which could really be set up to enable suitable policies. That's going to be very, very critical. Also, we would another very, very critical area piece is water. As you have all been hearing, the next war could be on water, and therefore, on a mission mode, we would really require water to be addressed. Again, that could, there is what the government could have a public database on water balances across all the river basins, sub basins, and also lay out some strategic sort of goals. And using that type of data, many organizations, be it a corporate or be it an NGO or be it even government agencies, by themselves or even in an approach in a manner of a consortia, we can develop appropriate interventions, and we could really incentivize those type of interventions through instruments like green credits, so to say. So that's something that one can see in the budget. So huge focus on that. And agriculture is a huge user of water. So a mission could really also promote smart agriculture, which is water efficient. So all of that, a green transition fund is something that we were been talking about, and which could be for innovative financing. The small scale and the mid-sized companies would really require that, and much of that portion of that green transition fund could be lent to lend support to the MSME. And again, industry is a huge task stakeholder in the transition to net zero. Hence, we would imagine that there has to be a roadmap for government and industry working together for us, even for sectoral net zero roadmap. So this is a very important area as we go along, and budget, I'm sure, would give it that significant importance.
So you expect a continuing focus on sustainability, but then every common man also wants to know what is going to happen to their taxation. Will they be paying more taxes or less taxes? So what are CII's recommendations on taxation, personal income tax, corporate tax, and customs duty, to name a few?
So no, I mean, you've stocked these three, if I can say, the corporate tax, so to say. I think one has to thank the government in terms of making India so competitive in terms of the tax rates. And today, going forward, one would only look at the corporate side of the taxes in terms of further simplification. And there has been a lot also on the ease of paying taxes. So probably now the focus has to be how do we keep reducing, tax litigation. That could be an important priority. And in the midterm, so to say, how do we expand the tax base? Then that would help augment revenues. So on the personal income side, we have been talking a lot about how do we put money in the hands of the people, more disposable income money of to the people. Now that it requires a much more rationalization of taxation, especially at the lower levels and even at the middle income side ticket. If that is where one would see a little bit of focus in the budget, or rather a very strong focus in the budget to give more money in the hands of the people. And that would boost consumption, and that would also be very, very critical. And we need to probably bring down the tax rates for especially the lower income brackets and even the mid-size, mid-level incomes. Lastly, you talked about the customs duty, and I would think that we need to keep very strong focus, priority in our mind with regards to the our domestic industry, and therefore keeping that in mind, we should, with appropriate carve-outs, move towards a three-tiered import duty structure, or at least a roadmap towards that. So lowest duties for raw materials, followed by intermediaries and final products. And as I said, and I repeat, carve-outs would be important because we need to see our domestic industries. That would really go a long way of seeing to it we get into the GVCs properly, as well as also see how we are able to get domestic productions up, as well as get connected with the world. So that's going to be very, very critical, and I'm sure that roadmap would be something that we can expect from the budget.
So the CII is recommending lower taxation for people in lower income brackets. But towards the end, let's sum it up. What is the industry wish list from the budget?
So, we've talked about it, and to sum up, as you said, I would think the first would be the continued, focus on a higher capex, the continued capex focus that we have seen, and really with a bias towards the rural areas. We spoke about irrigation, warehousing, and so on. The second is rural development. That itself focus on how do we get rural enterprises. One suggestion also is to see how we can see the PM Svanidhi Yojana to the rural and semi-urban areas, which could provide working capital to even the street vendors. And I think that's something that we would really like to see. One of certain schemes like the which really help promote micro enterprises, the Drone Didi. These will help develop a sort of a technology ecosystem in agriculture. So that's something that we would like to see focus on. That's the second piece. The third is, of course, we again spoke about manufacturing and manufacturing competitiveness, the focus on the whole related issues of cost, etc., which we need to work on to provide more impetus, decriminalization, and all that bracket, and even stable tax policies. That's going to be very, very important. So that's the third piece. And fourth, what we talked about was green transition, mitigation, as well as adaptation. And importantly, we spoke about the financing of the Green Finance Fund, etc. And lastly, the fifth, I would think, the next level of a lot of work and reforms really lie in our states, the states of India. And what's been one of the most successful work, if I can say, in the last few years have been GST and the tax reform, the GST coming in. But that required a lot of work with the states. The GST Council played a very critical role and an important role. So I would think that if we really move to the next difficult or the important areas of reform, be it agriculture, be it health, education, water we talked about, we really need to have a GST-like councils in some of these areas, or even in labor, say, for that matter. So how do we get the states folded in and while we give a focus on state projects in areas where it need to go, we could also take them in towards building a consensus in these issues as we move forward in the country.
So I would then sum it up by saying that the industry wants a pro-growth budget with focus on manufacturing, job creation, sustainability, and also a stable tax regime wherein those in the lower income brackets can expect some tax relief. Well, we leave it at that. Chandrajit Banerjee, Director General, Confederation of Indian Industry, thank you so much for joining us on In Conversation.
Thank you very much, Moon. Thank you very much for having me on your show, and always great to talk to you.